Neil. Thank you very much for joining us today. How was your break?
It was lovely, thank you, Gabby. Thank you for having me and inviting me. How was your break?
My break was good too. I think, as always, it goes very quickly, doesn't it?
That's the only regret. It just goes a little bit too fast. Yeah.
It is. I mean, you go into it knowing that, so you got to make the most of it, I think, at the time.
Absolutely.
But obviously,
yeah.
it's 2023 now, so I think it's a good theme for our chat today, looking ahead at trends that we can expect to see, at kind of how you think things will develop. So, I mean, that is a good place to start, really. I mean, what do you expect to see in 2023?
So if we think about that from an economical sense, and we think about everything that's been in the media, all the pressure that people have been under around the cost of living crisis, it's really difficult to kind of give any accurate viewpoint on it, because we can only speculate on what we expect to happen in the market. Mm-hmm. But effectively, the Bank of England have one job, which is to use their base rate to try and keep inflation under control, and they have a target rate for CPI of 2%. And if we look at where things currently are, then the Bank of England website lists CPI as 10.7, so way above the 2%. And we've got a bank base rate of 3.5%. And obviously what the Bank of England are doing is they're gradually pushing up the base rate to try and have an impact on inflation. And speculation in the market suggests that we might hit 4% early this year, with a potential peak somewhere near 5%. Now, obviously that's not great news for people with mortgages. The cost of fuel, gas, food, everything like that has pushed inflation higher and higher and higher. That's meant the Bank of England have had to move interest rates, and that has moved mortgage rates for people who are either on variable rate mortgages or also people who come to the end of a fixed rate deal. So if we then look at speculation again, the good kind of news that's out there that we kind of keep our fingers crossed and hope comes true. And this is from the Bank of England's own monetary report, published in November at the end of last year. They state that they expect inflation to fall rapidly in the second half of 2023. That will largely be to the fact that the upward massive surge in energy prices during 2022 falls out of the 12-month measuring period once we hit the middle of the year.
Okay.
So that means inflation naturally starts to come down, and actually the Bank of England's own expectations for longer term, so into the kind of 2024-25, is actually that CPI falls under the 2% target. Mm-hmm. If we take that a step further and say, okay, what will then what do we safely assume will happen if CPI is under 2%? It means that they will bring interest rates back down, because they will have met their goal effectively. Mm-hmm. And that should bring good news for homeowners with mortgage debts in the medium term, because once we're outside of the next 6 months, we should start to see remortgage rates and things like that come back down.
I mean, I was going to say, so what does this mean in the context of dentistry? What can people within dentistry expect on a day-to-day basis going forward?
So economically, you mean, or within the dental industry, or?
Economically, I mean, you spoke of mortgage rates there, which I guess is more general, but in terms of kind of economically, how will it impact the profession specifically?
So I think you kind of got to look at it from a perspective of, ultimately, a dental business is like any other business. It will do well when the average customer has more money in their pocket. Yeah. So if we go beyond the simple remit that I would normally take of what's the situation of my dental client in terms of the personal finances, and look at it and say, what's the business impact from the average person in the street having more money in the pocket because inflation's dampened down, the cost of living's dampened down, the mortgage jumps that we were fearing haven't come in as steep a way as we expected. It should mean the average customer has more money in their pocket, and therefore they're still looking at spending some of that money on themselves, whether that be on work that they need doing or work that they want doing, and that's obviously good news for dentists.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the biggest challenges, do you think, that dentistry can expect? I know you mentioned that obviously money in people's pockets. I think over the last 6 months, people have really sort of felt they've had to kind of watch out for how they spend their money, and then there has been some fear that this may negatively impact particularly private dentistry, I can imagine, given that people may have less disposable income. But I mean, in 2023, do you think this situation will improve? Do you think this is something that's going to have a major impact on the profession?
I definitely do see the cost of living crisis rebating a little. I think we all have to get used to a new normal of interest rates and inflation being higher than they've been since the credit crunch, and that does have some impact that lasts. So I don't think we're going to see everything revert back to the prices that we saw before we saw this kind of big surge over the last 12 months, but they will definitely fall, and that's obviously good news. And you know, we look at market speculation, and that's all we can do, and that's what it would currently tell us. When we look at the financial challenges within dentistry, there are really two main things. One of them particularly pressing, which is the fact that IR35 and the CESC legislation effectively becomes a real issue for dental businesses this year. So what and why, kind of where does that sit? So IR35, to get away from using terminology, is the legislation relates to basically off-payroll working, and it considers whether or not a person working under contract is legitimately doing so as a self-employed person, or whether they should indeed be deemed to be an employee and therefore taxed under pay-as-you-earn. And a change in government legislation in April 2021 now places the responsibility on the firm engaging a contractor, so you can view that as being your standard dental performer, to assess whether their terms of business make them legitimately self-employed or not. And that means that practices are now responsible for considering the status of their dental performers before April 2023. Okay. So that's a real pressing thing that's, you know, literally it's the next 3 months. So we're looking at this right now. So what is CEST? It's another piece of terminology. What it really means is it's the check of employment status for tax tool, and it sits on the HMRC website. It's effectively a series of questions that any individual or practice can run through to test where a performer is likely to stand against the IR35 legislation. And as I say, dental practices are required to do that prior to April. What's complicated that, Gabby, is that very, very recently the BDA have come out with new guidance. So a new contract for associates which identifies 3 different types of workers within dentistry. And effectively what we now have is we have employees, so genuine employed people. And that employment guarantees them rights like holiday pay and unfair dismissal and things like that. We have workers who are self-employed contractors who effectively pay their own tax in an eye but have an element of dictation in terms of what they do and when. And then we have non-workers, and that is where we would traditionally sit our standard dental associate. Okay. So people who don't have specific employment rights other than those set out in their contracts, and most associates fit that category, and effectively would therefore deem themselves to be self-employed people. So we look at that new guidance from the BDA and the new contracts from the BDA, and it just really, really highlights the importance of both individual dentists and practices really carefully looking at, I suppose, each of the people performing dentistry, whether that be a dental associate, a hygienist, a therapist, and assessing them prior to April, and starting to get a really good feel for what the implications may well be of somebody being deemed to be an employee rather than a self-employed person. Okay. We're also starting to see some associates actually identify a preference for potentially being an employed person and all the benefits that brings in terms of things like holidays, sick pay, maternity and paternity, and obviously, as we say, the rights to kind of claim unfair dismissal as well. So there is potentially a financial pressure on dental practices that comes out of the push to use CEST before April and assess performers. It's definitely something that dental owners, dental performers should be looking at. If we then look kind of beyond that at the other financial issues that could bite in dentistry, we've then also got the fact that the Health and Social Care Committee for NHS England has launched an inquiry into dentistry, the first since 2008, and it means that MPs will consider for the first time in a long time the current NHS dental contract and whether it disincentivises dentists from taking on new patients, whether it gives them the right incentives to recruit and retain dental professionals. And we could potentially see impacts as soon as April from that. So lots of things. What it ultimately poses the question is what effectively is the ongoing profitability, viability of not just any standard NHS practice, but any practice in terms of all these different changes that are on the horizon.
Yeah. I mean, what do dental teams and dentists specifically, I guess, need to do to kind of prepare for these changes that are going to come into place? What can they do to kind of protect their finances the best that they can in 2023?
So I think really what we've got to do is we've got to immediately say you need to be getting really, really good advice. You need to be getting specialist dental guidance from an accountant. You potentially need specialist dental guidance from a lawyer, and you absolutely need specialist financial advice on the back of it as well. So if we look at examples, we know we've got dental accountancy firms that do benchmarking exercises that look at not only the profitability of a business in terms of its KPIs and its markers against the average practice, whether that be in terms of what they pay their associates, what their expenses ratios are, also the profit level and therefore their EBITDA and potential saleable value as well. You also have got the prospect of looking at whether the practice is set up from an efficiency perspective in the right way for tax efficiency. So could potentially a change of tax structure be more profitable for them? And I think we're in an era where every single practice and every single dentist should be asking themselves, what is my business model? And am I actually running things in the right and the most efficient and the way that generates me the most value for the time that I spend at work and the pressure that creates me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for anybody watching now, is there any advice you can give, kind of sort of a snapshot of advice, I guess, on what they can do maybe even today, you know, when they finish watching this, what are the first things they can do now to make a difference?
So, I mean, immediately number one is go on and look for yourself at the CEST assessment tool on the HMRC website, whether that be you're looking for yourself as a performer and trying to understand where you may fit beyond April, whether that be that you're looking at the performers working in your practice. Go out and do that. It's there, it's usable instantly. HMRC have said that they will largely abide by the outcome of the CEST tool. So it's something you can immediately go and get reassurance on. Definitely go away and look at the BDA guidance on dental worker types that I've identified in the new principal associate contract and start to question how that sits in your practice and whether you really, really do meet the terms of your performers being non-workers, so the traditional self-employed associate. And I think the last one I would do is with the potential for a new NHS contract on the horizon, and also the end of the tax year and the end of the UDA year being so close now, is have a really good look at UDA performance, see where you are to target whilst we're early in the new year. Look at what you can do to catch up if you are behind, and one of the reasons, you know, we're so keen to recommend people get specialist advice, and again this goes back to accountancy, is you've got that ability to look at the pros and cons of whether you incentivise your dental performers to do more to get through any backlog, and how that looks from a profit perspective relative to potentially suffering a clawback penalty and then a proportionate loss of contract. So there's loads and loads of things dentists need to be busy with early on in this new year, certainly well before we get near the traditional 1st of April, end of performance year, almost the end of the tax year. So much for them to be doing.
a bit like Christmas is over quite quickly. These next few months go very quickly as well, don't they? So,
they absolutely do, and such busy times for advisors and accountants. So yeah, go
good
and
luck
kind
to
of
you then, really, Neil.
yeah, go and grab them early. Go and get them whilst you've got time in the diaries.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for offering up some advice there. I'm sure there's a lot that our watchers can take away.
No problem at all. Thank you for your time, Gabby.